Hello students and welcome to chapter number 8. In this chapter we will be discussing writing bad news messages. Oftentimes in the business environment you will be faced with situations where you will be tasked with delivering negative news to fellow colleagues, to customers, to suppliers, to other parties. So what are the techniques that would help you, let's say, soften the blow for those at the receiving end of the message so that you can deliver the message in an effective way and in a way that is respectful and at the same time considerate of their feelings and of the situation they are undergoing. So let us start off our chapter with this saying from Andy Grove. The worse the news, the more effort should go into communicating it. So the more negative and the more you think that the person is going to be negatively impacted, you need to put forth more effort into planning it and how exactly you are going to compose the message and how you are going to deliver it. You should be very careful with how you deliver this news. Otherwise, you could be faced with a situation where where the receivers of the message are going to be reacting very emotionally, or they could basically lash out at you. So even though it's an unfortunate situation, it can be handled with effectiveness. So here is our roadmap for navigating through this chapter. First of all, we will be looking at examples of different bad news messages, and then we will discuss the planning stage. How would you plan delivering bad news? And then how would you reply if you were at the receiving end of that message? If you were receiving bad news, how would you reply to it in an effective way? And then announcing bad news to a whole group of audiences. So instead of addressing one person, you are now addressing a group of people, a large group of receivers. So it's a little bit different because when you address someone personally, you can customize the message, you can involve emotional aspects. But when you are announcing big news to a big group of people, the strategies that you might employ in this case are a little different. Here are some, let's say, funny cartoons about delivering bad news messages. In the first one, in the upper left corner, the manager here is saying you should check your emails more often. I fired you over 3 weeks ago. So what does that indicate? It indicates that maybe the the medium, the channel that the manager selected or chose to deliver this bad news that this employee was fired was not really appropriate, because the message did not arrive. The message was not received. So this implies that you need to be very careful with the medium and the way, the channel that you select to deliver your message. Here's another example where someone is also being let go or fired or terminated, but in this case, a formal letter is being used to deliver this piece of bad news, and this is the common way in professional organizations when it comes to delivering such news, because it needs to be documented. This particular action, this particular procedure needs to be documented for, legal purposes. And if you would pause the video and read through the letter, you would see that, it has a clearly stated subject line. It has a specific date. It is addressed to a certain someone, and it mentions the reasons and it mentions the actions. So this is a well-written termination letter. And here is another example of an email, probably, or it could be also a written letter where bad news is being delivered as well. But in this case, it's not termination of employment. It's not, about firing someone. It's about telling someone that they are rejected for a position that they have applied to. So again, it has a clear subject. It has it is addressed to a particular person. It mentions also the designation of the sender of the message. It mentions the reasons why the candidate or the applicant has been rejected, and it ends with a well-wishing note or a positive note. So again, you could pause the video to read through the letter, and you would see how all of those elements are embedded. And now with the second part of the chapter, planning. So when you are given the task of having to deliver bad news to someone, what are the steps that you would follow in order to compose your letter? So that's the planning stage. Now, you need to, first of all, in any type of communication, as we have seen in previous chapters, you need to determine your purpose. You need to state your goals and objectives. So what are your goals when it comes to communicating bad news? The first thing on your, at the top of your list should be make your decision clear. So you need to be very clear with what it is you are telling them, so that there is no confusion on their part about what the decision is. You need to state very clearly that you have been terminated. You are no longer an employee here. So the decision needs to be stated clearly. And then you need to help your audience accept the message. You need to deliver the message in a way so that they understand the situation and that they don't react, overly emotional to it. You need to also maintain a goodwill relationship, meaning you don't want to end the relationship on a very negative tone. Life could go around and this person might come back and work for you again, or you might go and work for their company in the future. So you want to keep a good relationship between you and the person who is receiving this bad news. You also want to prevent further unnecessary discussions. What that means is that people would want, when you tell someone that they are fired, of course they are going to not like it, and they might want to have long discussions about why they are fired and how someone else should have been fired instead, and they would want to sit and talk to you for so long about that they can change and then they can improve and so on. And this is now unnecessary because the decision has not been reached arbitrarily, I'm assuming. So the decision to fire someone, for example, has been made after a lot of thought and discussions. So you want to prevent and stop those unnecessary discussions. And then you also need to preserve the company's image. This is a person who is now terminated, is no longer an employee here, for example, and they are going to post something on social media. You don't want them to post something negative about your company on social media, that they were very disrespectful to me, they treated me with they were not kind when it comes to treating me and letting me go, they were unfair, they were unjust. So you want to deliver the news in a respectful way so that you preserve your company's image and protect its reputation. And finally, of course, you want to protect the company against lawsuits. There are rules and regulations that are in place, rules and regulations by governmental agencies, by the Ministry of Human Resources here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that when you want to let someone go, you can only let them, you can only fire them based on justification, on just cause. And then you need to follow the rules and the regulations. It needs to be documented. It needs to be in a written letter. You must have cause. You must give them, prior notice. So all of those things must be kept in mind when you are delivering bad news. So here's a situation in which we are discussing what is the best medium for the message, what is the best channel, what is the best way to use when it comes to delivering bad news. So what is the situation? What is the bad news here? We will talk to a long time supplier of our company, and we want to tell them that we are going to cancel a contract with them. So this is bad news. So what medium, what way should be used here? Should we do that through email, letter, or phone call? Now let's evaluate each and every one of them. What is the problem with emails when it comes to a situation like that? It is impersonal. Remember, this is a long-time supplier, meaning you have had a long relationship with this company. So sending them a short email indicates that you do not care about them, that you do not care about the relationship that you developed with them. And also, doing that in a letter, while it is good for legal reasons, but it might not be the best medium to choose first. Why? Again, because it's a little impersonal. It doesn't indicate that you feel that this is bad news and I shouldn't and we hope that this is not the situation, but we simply had better offers from other suppliers. So you could use a letter, but it shouldn't be your how you first inform this supplier of this news. And then phone call. A phone call is a good medium to choose because it is personal, it is customizable, it is a good way to send and to show to your receivers, to that supplier, that you care enough that you actually call them and informed them through a phone call rather than just simply sending an email. So in this case, a phone call should be selected first, and then also second to that, after you have informed them first through a phone call, then you can tell them in the phone call that I will also send you a letter. And why do you do that in business? For documentation. You want to keep records of this cancellation. And now let's look at a second situation. So what is the situation here? What is the case? What is the bad news? We are firing a new employee who works across the country. So we are in Jeddah, and this person works for the company's branch in Jubail. Okay, so it is across the country. So do we use email, phone call, or in-person visit? Again, what is the problem with emails? They are good for short communications, but they are impersonal. Okay, they indicate that you are ruthless and heartless and you don't care about this new employee, and you're just informing them of the news and just letting them go. What is the problem with a phone call? There isn't much of a problem. It's customizable. Again, the same situation in the previous example. It is personal. It indicates that you care enough to call them and have a conversation with them. What is the problem with an in-person visit? Even though it is oftentimes the best way to deliver bad news, but in this case, remember that this employee works across the country, so you have to travel very long hours in order to reach that destination, which means for your company, this means that it's an expense. The company has to pay for ticket, for accommodation, for a hotel, etc. So it's not really an effective and feasible way. So in this case, what should be the answer? Again, a phone call. If the employee works in the same area, if the company's branch is in Jubail and he works in Dammam, or he works in Jubail itself, then of course you would go with a face-to-face meeting. But since in this case this employee is working for our branch in a very far away city, so we would just go with a phone call. And now let's get into the steps of planning bad news messages. So what are the the different steps that you need to follow so that you compose a well-developed message? The first thing you need to do is, again, knowing your audience first. And when you know your audience well, you will know how to organize your message. So you need to organize your message based on the audience, as we have seen in previous chapters, and as we will see in the coming slides. Then you need to justify the decision. So why have you made that decision to fire someone, or to cancel a contract, or to reject a job candidate? And then you deliver the bad news. So you give them the decision that has been made, that they have been terminated, that they have been rejected, that you are not giving them your business, etc. And then you conclude by closing on a pleasant note, so that you keep being respectful and that you maintain and preserve the relationship. And now the first step of organizing the message for delivering bad news, like based on the audience, do you use a direct or an indirect plan? So again, depending on the audience. So when is it better? When is it more effective to use the direct plan? When the bad news is insignificant, when it's not really that big, it's not really that important. And then when the reader prefers directness. So you have to know your readers, you have to know your audience. So are they someone who prefers, news to be delivered straightforward, to be direct, to be to the point, or are they not? And then when the reader expects a no response, what that means is that when the reader, or when the client or the employee has put in a request that is difficult, he or she already knows that there's a very high possibility that their request is going to be rejected. So when they expect this already, when they expect that their request is going to be denied, then it is more effective to use the direct plan. And then when the writer wants to emphasize the news, so when you really want to highlight this part, when you really want to emphasize and stress the decision that has been made, then you use the direct plan, where you introduce the decision first, and then you talk about the supporting points, the justification for making that decision. And now the indirect plan, when is it more effective to be used? When the reader reports to you, or when the reader is a customer. So it is more considerate that way. Instead of delivering the news first, delivering the main idea first, the decision first. So you don't want to tell them you have been fired for the following reasons. You want to tell them the reasons first, so that you soften the blow, and you make the decision a little bit lighter on them. And also when the reader prefers the indirect plan. So how would you know this? How would you know what the reader prefers? Based on experience, based on past interactions, based on the analysis that you made of your audience. And finally, when you don't know the reader, it's always safer to go with an indirect plan when you don't know your reader well. So it would be more considerate, it would be more appropriate to use the indirect plan, where you present the justification first, and then you announce the bad news, or the decision that has been made. So how do you exactly use the direct plan? You begin with presenting a brief rationale along with the bad news. So in the same part, typically in the same sentence, you need to give a brief reason why the decision has been made, and then also you need to mention the decision. You follow that with explanations, so more reasons, and what the decision means, and if there are any particular items that need to be addressed. And then finally you end with a friendly closing note. So you need to introduce the reason why this decision has been made, along with the bad news itself. So we regret to inform you that due to your inadequate performance, it has been decided that you are going to be terminated. So in the same sentence, you are giving a small or a brief or a short reason why the decision has been made, and then you also introduce the decision itself. Then the next paragraph could be the explanation, the details. Why, why has, why has the decision been made, and why, they have been fired, and for so long they could not deliver assignments on time, and etc. And then finally you end with a friendly closing note where you mention that we wish you the best in your future endeavors, and we hope that you find a better opportunity elsewhere, and we wish you all the best, and that's it. So present the reason along with the bad news, follow it with details, and then end it with a friendly closing note. So we have seen now how to use the direct plan when it comes to delivering bad news. But what do we do when we want to use the indirect plan? And that is to be used in the appropriate situations mentioned earlier. So here's a question for us. What are the 4 elements of a bad news message that uses the indirect plan? And the correct answer here is C, buffer, explanation, bad news, and close. So we will go through each and every one of those. So when you want to use the indirect plan when it comes to delivering bad news messages, you begin with something called a buffer. And a buffer is basically a statement that reduces the shock, that softens the blow. And then you provide your explanation. So what is happening exactly? Why is this decision being made? And then you state the bad news. You mention the decision that was made, that someone was fired or that a contract has been canceled. And then finally you close, you end, you conclude with a positive, good-willing note. So what do we do with buffer statements? So what is the goal of a buffer statement in a bad news message? Why do we use a buffer? Why do we use a statement that reduces the shock? And the correct answer here is A, to establish or strengthen the reader-writer relationship. So the goal of the buffer is to show the reader, to show the receivers that, I still respect you, and that even though maybe like the official formal relationship between you as an employee and me as a manager, or me as a representative of a company, has ended, we still, we still want to maintain and preserve a positive tone and a positive relationship. So either to establish it if it's not existing, or to strengthen it. So the buffer statement acts as a way to reduce the shock, to soften the blow, to basically, open your message. And it should be neutral, it should be relevant. So neutral in the fact that it's, you're not being overly positive, and you're not being very negative as well. I mean, it's already negative news, so you don't want your opening to be negative. You want it to be something a little bit, neutral. Neutral meaning it's not positive and it's not negative. And then it should be relevant. So relevant to the topic that is being discussed, relevant to the decision that is being made, that is being delivered. And it also should be supportive. Supportive meaning it needs to be considerate, and it needs to be something that basically boosts up the spirits of the receiver. It needs to be also interesting, so that any opening, any kind of beginning of any writing piece needs to be attention grabbing and interesting. And finally, of course, it needs to be kept short and brief. So you don't want a buffer statement that is 1 paragraph long. You want a buffer statement that is only 1 sentence, and the briefer the better. So here are some examples of buffers. So we have different types of buffers that can be used in your opening when it comes to using the indirect plan for delivering bad news. So things like when you could begin your writing piece with a compliment. So congratulations on having served the community of Greenville for 10 years. So this is a buffer. This is a statement that basically reduces the shock. It is positive. It's a little supportive. It's short. So it serves the goal of a buffer statement. And then a general principle. This is another buffer type. So an example of that would be, we believe in giving our distributors a wide range of support in promoting our products. So you mentioned that this is a principle, this is a value that we appreciate, and it's a good way to start your message so that you ensure that you don't get into the point directly, because you are using here the indirect plan, and this way you are trying your best to reduce the shock and soften the blow. So many types of buffers that can be used. Again, always keep in mind the goal, and the goal here is to establish or to strengthen the relationship between you as a writer and the receiver or the reader of the message. So the second part now is offering explanation or justification why the decision was made, why the bad decision here was made, and the bad news is being delivered because of a reason. So how come this decision was reached, and in what way? These are the justifications and the reasons and the explanations that we need to offer. So what we do here is that we need to stress or emphasize the reasons that benefit others. Remember, back in writing persuasive messages, what you want is that you need to get your readers to buy into what you're selling. So what you're selling here is a decision, and you want to convince them that this decision was right, and even though it's bad for you, but this is the correct decision. So you need to emphasize the benefits. You need to stress and emphasize the reasons that benefit others. So how is this decision going to be helpful actually, and going to have some advantages either to the person who is being mostly impacted by it, or to other people? Okay, maybe it could be other customers, it could be other employees, etc. And then you need to state reasons using positive language. So when you highlight those reasons, when you emphasize them, use positive terminology, use positive words, so that at least subconsciously, the person reading the message is going to make that connection, and link the positive terminology with the bad decision, or with the negative news that is being delivered. Then explain the rationale for the company policy. So don't just say this is company policy and it has been decided based on the policy and the rules and the regulations to terminate your employment. No, explain why this policy was in place to begin with. How come this policy is helpful? How is this policy actually taking into consideration a lot of other factors? And then state reasons concisely to avoid impatience. Concisely, briefly. It needs to be short, it needs to be clear, it needs to be specific. Okay? You don't want to go on and on and on about explaining. Remember, we are using the indirect plan, so you don't want to go on and on explaining the reasons why. And until now, I have been reading 2 paragraphs without knowing what was the decision. So you want to be very brief again and concise when it comes to providing your explanations and justifications. And finally, present the strongest reasons first. So keep your strongest and most important reasons at the beginning. This way you give power and strength to your message, and the reader earlier on is going to understand why and how the decision was made. Now we get to the part where we actually state our bad news. So remember, we are using here the indirect plan. So we offered a buffer statement at the beginning. and then we mention some justification and explanation, and now we get to the bad news itself. So we present the bad news after we have delivered a buffer and justification, so it comes as a logical outcome. So it comes as a result of the reasons that we mentioned before. So when you tell someone that their performance was not adequate, that they were, constantly late when it comes to delivering assignments and projects, so what is the logical outcome? What is the result that makes sense? Is that they are probably fired. So when it is presented like that, it makes more sense to the people even reading the message. State the bad news in positive and impersonal language. I mean, someone would say it is bad news. How can we present it in a positive way? It is difficult, and sometimes, regardless of how careful you are, people are just going to lash out. People are just going to have a breakdown, and they are going to be very angry and shouting at you. But try your best to, again, use positive terminology. Don't, attack the person. Critique the performance, critique, the results. Do not critique personalities, do not critique styles and things like that, unless that is the reason. I mean, sometimes people are fired because they are, unpleasant. They make, very harsh remarks, and they fight with people all the time. They have a bad temper, so sometimes that is the reason why they are fired. Maybe they just attacked another person. But when it comes to, terminating employment, for example, people are typically terminated because their performance was not, up to the liking of the supervisor. So try your best not to attack the person. Try your best not to critique personalities and, attitudes and things like that, but critique performance, results, keep it objective. And use impersonal language. What that means is that you don't want to say, I'm firing you because you are the problem. I'm firing you because your performance was not as, good as other people, for example. Then do not apologize unless you are at fault. So don't say, I'm sorry you are fired, or I'm sorry I'm making that decision because you are being fired, or because, we cannot, take you on as an employee. So do not apologize. This is a logical outcome. This is a decision that has been made after careful consideration and deliberation with others. So you don't apologize. You don't say you're sorry unless you made a mistake. And then finally, make the refusal definite. So what that means is that when you say no to someone, when you say that you have been fired or you have been rejected or whatever it is, you need to make it firm. So it's a definite no. There is no negotiation. I mean, the decision is not going to change unless something, very strong presents itself, so that the receivers of the message really understand that the decision is final, and no, they don't want you don't want them to come back to you with long letters or request long meetings to discuss, to discuss the decision and try to change your mind. This is why it needs to be concise. This is why it needs to be brief, and this is why it needs to be very clear. And then the last part of delivering bad news is, the closing, the conclusion. So we always say that you need to close on a pleasant or a positive note. So there are things to use and things to avoid. What are some of the approaches that you should avoid, that you should not be using when it comes to, concluding a bad news message? You don't want to apologize. As we mentioned, you say you're sorry only when you have made a mistake. And you don't want to anticipate problems as well. You don't want to say, at the end of your message, you have told someone that they have been fired, or a contract has been canceled, or, something else. You don't want to, tell them that, I don't want you to shout, and I don't want you to come and, and make a big scene in the office. You don't want to, mention scenarios like that. You don't want to also invite needless communication. You don't want to tell them, if you want to talk to me, I'm always open. Is the decision final? If yes, then they shouldn't come and talk to you at all. They just need to collect their things and, sort things out with the human resources department and just go home. And then repeating the bad news is something to avoid. So you have already told them that they have been fired. You don't want to say that again, because this is going to, make them even more angry. You don't want to use a cliche. What is a cliche? We have seen this term in other chapters. So this is an overly used expression. So you don't want to say, well, this is life. Life is difficult. This is kind of a cliche that is, that has been used so many times, and it doesn't mean anything to people anymore. And then you don't want to reveal any doubts. You should communicate your decision in a firm way to the receivers, to the readers, so that you appear as someone who has made a decision that is final. You have made a decision after careful consideration and after careful discussions with others. So you don't want to send any signals that the decision was not made in a careful way. And finally, you don't want to sound selfish. You should always be respectful and considerate of others. You don't want to say, well, this is firing you is the best thing that we did for our company, or you don't want to use terms like that. So what are some of the things that you should be using? What are some of the techniques to use when it comes to ending your bad news message? You could offer best wishes. Remember, we want to preserve a good relationship, even though the official relationship is ending between us, the company, and this employee who is being fired, but we still want to end on a positive note. So we could offer them best wishes. I mean, we wish you the best in your future endeavors. And, something as simple as that could mean something to these people. And then you could suggest a counter proposal. Suggest a counter proposal. So what is a counter proposal? So this is a proposal that you are making in response to a proposal that they have already made. So in case, for example, the case here is a contract, and they were saying, for example, that we will sell you this product for 50,000 reals. So you are telling them no, you are delivering bad news, but at the same time, you could, in case the decision is not final, you can tell them, I am willing to reconsider if you would offer me a discounted price, for example, in case you are talking to a supplier. And then you could direct to other sources. So oftentimes in companies, what they do is that they would tell you in the message, in the letter of termination, that yes, even though we are unhappy to tell you that your contract has been terminated, we wish you the best, and we want you, these are the email addresses or the phone numbers of the Human Resources Development Fund, HRDF, here in the kingdom, where you can contact them and put in an application so that they can give you some money, or they can help you find another job. So you are directing these receivers of bad messages to other sources where they can get help. And then referring to sales promotions. Again, one of the techniques to be used always, remember we talked about sales letters before. So what you always take any opportunity, any communication opportunity, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's in a written letter or a tweet or a meeting, to promote your company so that you strengthen its reputation. So one of the things to be used when it comes to even in bad news messages is that you can refer to some of these services provided by your company. So when you're talking to a customer or a supplier, for example, and you tell them that their request has been rejected, still we can offer you some other thing, or we are open to consider other products or something like that. So it's a good way to keep a positive relationship and to promote your company's products or services. And now with the third part of our chapter, and that is replying with bad news messages. So in this case, you are not the initiator of the communication. Someone has already communicated with you, and in your reply, in your feedback, you are going to tell them something negative. So in this case, you are basically responding and only reacting to something that has been already in motion, but the content of your feedback, the content of your response, of your reply, is going to be bad news. This is evident in these three types. So when someone suggests something to you and gives you an idea, so you are just now responding to them and giving them some feedback. So you want to reject this idea. So this is a bad news reply. And also when someone offers to do you a favor, when someone offers you to, for example, give you a ride, as simple as that, or when someone tells you that I have a company, I have an opening in my company, I have a job vacancy in my company, and I can help you, I can help put in a good word for you so you can come and work in my company. You want to tell them no. You want to refuse their offer or their favor. And also when you are refusing a customer request. So in these cases, you didn't initiate, you didn't start the communication, you are only responding, but your response contains bad news. So it's idea rejection, favor refusal, or rejecting or refusing a customer request. How would you refuse a customer request? So oftentimes you will see that when you work, not only if you are a salesperson, even when you are an engineer and a client is asking you for something and you want to tell them no, when you are a computer programmer, for example, and your client is asking you to do some modifications to the software and you want to tell them no, this is not possible, so you will be placed in this situation where you are going to tell them no. So how would you refuse a customer request? What are some of the tips and guidelines that you would follow? You want to use the indirect plan if the reader is emotionally involved in the situation. Remember before we said that you use the indirect plan when the topic is significant. When the topic is really significant, it's important to the reader. When the reader is emotionally involved, it means a lot to them. So you would use the indirect plan to be more considerate and to soften the blow. And then you also use impersonal and neutral language to explain the reasons for the refusal. What that means, again, is that you are not attacking them personally, even though they might be the reason why. So you want to be considered. You don't want to be you don't want your reasons and justifications to be about them, about their personality, about them as a person. You want to be more objective and use neutral and impersonal language. Do not make it about them, make it about the case, make it about the situation, make it about the reasons. And then you also want to offer a small compromise to help retain the customer's goodwill. So even though you are telling them no, I am refusing and rejecting your request, you still want to offer them something so that you keep a positive, you keep a good and maintain a good relationship with the customer. So here's a situation, here's an example. This is a person who wrote to Samsonite, a big handbag company, and he or she was complaining that the handle ripped off, and they were requesting a refund, or they were requesting to be compensated with a new bag. So this is an example of what you shouldn't do. This is not a good reply. You don't want to make it about them. If you pause the video and read this reply, you would see that it's attacking the person. It's telling the person that you are the reason. You don't know how to use the bag. It was your fault. Even though it could be the case, but you shouldn't, talk in this tone and communicate in this tone with your customers. Now, this is a better and a more effective response and reply to the customer's request, even though it is still bad news, even though you are still saying no to them. But if you, again, you can pause the video and read through the reply, you would see that it uses the indirect plan, where they offer a buffer statement, where they offer an explanation and justification. They are explaining the company policy, and they are respectfully rejecting the request. So this is a more effective, a more respectful way of saying no to a customer's request. And to even go further, to maintain a positive and preserve a good relationship with the customer, you can offer a compromise. So it's kind of a middle ground solution. Even though I'm saying no to your original request, I can offer you something else in return. I can offer you to repair the bag and ship it to you for free, for example. Or I can offer you a discount if you would make a future purchase. So it's a good way, a good technique to be used to keep and maintain a positive relationship. And now lastly, the last part of bad news messages is announcing. So sometimes you need to announce bad news to a large audience. It could be your entire customer pool, or you want to tell your entire company's employees that something bad is happening to the company. So again, how would you announce and compose such a message for mass communication? So here are some examples when it comes to delivering bad news about normal operations. So these are, companies that, that have, day-to-day operations, and something bad is happening. So they are announcing to their customers, they are announcing to their stakeholders, bad news about their day-to-day operations. So in this case, an airport here at the very beginning. The first example we have here is from an airport who is saying that flights has been canceled. Of course, this is bad news because now people are going to be late. They're not going to be getting to their families on time. So if you look at some of the examples, you would see it is kept very short. And for further details and updates, you can check a link or a website. Another company is a power company. Okay, it's an electricity company, and it's telling its customers and homeowners that something bad happened and they will be without electricity for some time. So again, what's the news and how they are fixing it? So it's all about keeping it short, keeping it clear, and explaining and delivering and stating what is the bad news and what you are doing to fix it. This is how effective you should be. And the last thing we will do in this chapter is that we will look at an example from Yahoo. There was a case in Yahoo where the company was making serious cuts. So they were laying off a lot of employees. So they took their time when it comes to planning how to deliver this bad news, and when it comes to how they are going to communicate with each and every employee, and how they would prepare the managers to deliver this message to the rest of the company. So they came up with kind of let's say a manual or a guideline book where they trained managers, and they told them that these are the steps that you should follow to notify your employees, to tell your employees about the bad news that they are being let go or fired. So it is very detailed. So this is to be used by managers, by the people who are going to deliver the bad news. So it is even comprehensive, meaning it takes everything into consideration, from even setting up the meeting. So how are you going to talk to the employee? Which medium, which channel of communication are you going to use? They said if you are going to talk to them in person, you walk to them, and they are even offering some examples. Thank you, Aaron, for coming in. I have some information regarding our organization I want to tell you in person. So that's one medium, that's face to face. If they are going to talk to them by phone, then they are also suggesting some phrases to be used. And this is how comprehensive and how thoughtful this guideline book was. This is how careful you should be also when you are delivering bad news on, of this magnitude to the people with whom you are working or to your customers. Part of the training also is do's and don'ts. So what you should do as a manager delivering bad news and what you shouldn't be doing. For example, let's just take a look at a couple of them. So you need to be clear, concise, and respectful. This is what Yahoo is telling managers to do. Exactly what we are saying in our chapter. You need to direct employees, for example, to the right management consultant. Remember we said you need to offer them or direct the receivers of bad messages or bad news to other sources. So in this case, Yahoo is offering some extra help for the employees who are being fired and let go so that they can move on with their lives. What they shouldn't be doing, you don't want to say you disagree with the decision. Remember, you are a representative of the company. You are a manager in this company. You don't want to come to an employee and say, I don't like this decision and I do not agree with this decision, but hey, I'm just doing my job. You are not being firm. You are showing doubt about the company's management. If you don't like it that much, if you really disagree with it, then you quit yourself. You don't want to ruin the company's image and reputation. You don't want to also, attempt to answer the question, why me? So when you tell someone, of course, that they're being fired, they are going to say, why me? Why did you choose me? In this case, the decision was not about, particular persons or people. It was merely about budgets. There were simply no money. So you don't want to, get into a long conversation. Remember, we said in our tips before that you don't want to invite unnecessary communication. So you want to avoid long meetings and discussions, about decisions that are already final. Going even deeper and offering even more advice and guidelines to managers about how to handle the situation, they are Yahoo, for example, in the PowerPoint slides or the booklet that they have developed for managers, they are telling them about, extra information. So employees, for example, may not use vacation days to extend the termination date, and etc. So it's an immediate decision. It needs to take effect as immediately. So again, it's all about making sure that your managers, that the people representing your company really understand the situation. You don't want to assume that they know what to do. This is how careful you should be when it comes to, handling sensitive situations like that. And then finally, you want to introduce the employees to right management. So when you are done, again, this is, these are guidelines for the managers delivering bad news. When you are finished with notifying your employee, what you want to say is the following. I'm going to introduce you now to right management, who will tell you about the career services you will be receiving. Right management is basically a consultant that Yahoo has hired in order to help their laid off, terminated employees find jobs in other companies. So again, directing your employees to other sources. It's all about sending a message and a signal that even though the official relationship between us, Yahoo, and you, the employee, has ended, we still respect you enough that we want to offer you some services to help you find a job elsewhere. So this is a practical example from what used to be a leading company in the IT sector to show you how sensitive situations like this could be handled with grace and effectiveness. Thank you so much for listening in, and I'll see you on the next chapter.